I mean, I suppose we've had that situation that he's been seriously ill for now a number of weeks. And in fact, when I was out in Brazil, the concern was that people thought he might die during the World Cup, and that could have brought disruption and everything, and obviously had a huge impact. And the Brazilian team took banners out onto the field in Qatar, and it was also in the stand. So I think people were, they got themselves mentally ready for it. They knew he was in a very weak state, and they got the messages from his family that this was the last time. He was not likely to come out of hospital again. So in many ways, people were ready for it, but it's still a shock when it happens, and the news came. I mean, everyone was hoping he'd hang on into the new year. But, in many ways, at least he's at peace now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, especially if you've been in Brazil very recently, you'll have been able to kind of get a sense of just how important he is to Brazilian people.
Yeah, I think that probably the easiest way to explain it is he's very much like the Queen was to the British people. The Brazilians don't have a royal family. Yet since the 1950s, one of the constants in every Brazilian's life has been Pele. And a bit like the Queen, he wasn't a political animal. He tried to keep as much as possible out of politics, so that, everybody could love him. And Brazil, as Britain's been divided by Brexit and things like this, in Brazil, it's been divided by their current president and the president-elect. And so somebody like Pele was one that actually unified the whole country. And we're seeing that now back in Brazil. It's something that everybody feels about, and much like when the Queen died for the British people. And so he is somebody that since the 1950s has been a constant. And he was as a global figure, the only comparable one is probably Muhammad Ali, that it was Ali and Pele together who were the two great names that could go to any country and would be recognized. And they were also two men that took themselves beyond their sport, and when they retired, they were still as important and as active in many ways once they'd retired as they were when they were actually heavily involved in their sports. So yeah, I mean, so for many Brazilians, it's, my God, it's the first time it's without Pele, and he's no longer there. But it's interesting, all the Brazilian press have sort of got this theme together that it's Pele is eternal. So they're doing that the date when he was born, but they're not saying the date he died, because they're saying his legacy will go on forever.
Yeah, I mean, you've kind of touched on it there. I was going to ask kind of what you'd managed to pick up from the Brazilian reaction to it.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I can see over my social media feeds that just about every single person I know is posting something about Pele and when they met him or when they didn't meet him or whether they were with him. And he was this figure that would pop up in places. And again, like a Muhammad Ali, if he walked in the room, everybody knew who he was. And that wasn't just in Brazil. That wouldn't matter what country he went to. Everybody knew Pele. And it's also interesting to see the global football stars recognizing that without Pele, the game wouldn't be where it is today. And I think that's very crucial. I thought it was a lovely post to one of them saying that there's nothing new in football because Pele did it first.
Yeah, that's a lovely tribute. I've seen that. I can't remember who it was, but I've seen that one as well.
I think it's Haaland, the Man City striker.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's not, obviously it has this importance to Brazilian people and maybe, like you say, a lot culturally, but on the global scale, it kind of goes beyond that and is very much important from a footballing sense as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think people forget that it was really the 1970 World Cup that was the first really global impact World Cup, because it was the first one that many countries took the live TV coverage from. 66 wasn't shown in that many countries live because, I mean, it's technology and how things have changed. I mean, we would take it for granted now, everyone's watching. I was on the metro in Rio and people would be watching that day's football games of any country on their mobile phones. That's how things have changed. But the 1970 World Cup would have been the first one to be watched live in Brazil and around many countries in the world. And of course, there was nothing better than the final between Brazil and Italy, where, Brazil just played the beautiful game. And really, after that, people were then expecting so much from the 74, the 78 World Cups and so on to where we are today. And then the incredible thing is you've got to think that the next World Cup is going to be in the USA, and what is it, the second or third time they've hosted it. I mean, back in the 70s, the US had no interest in football at all. And it was Pele going up for the Cosmos that helped take, and because Pele went, a lot of other people like Beckenbauer agreed to go and play in America and really sow the seeds that we now see as football in the US.
And you speak a little bit about the people who have met him as well. So I know you've met him, haven't you?
Yeah, I sort of met him on several occasions that things I was doing, I'd run into him, and he was always very pleasant. But I remember the first time I met him, I was organizing, looking after the foreign press coming to Rio for Carnival and the parades. And we set up a press room at one of the hotels in Copacabana for the foreign press to come in and pick up credentials and things and get some information. And the Brazilian Tourist Board, Embratur, said to me, anything else you might want? And I jokingly said to them, can you get me Pele? Thinking that this is not going to happen. This would have been in the 1980s. And they said, well, we'll see what we can do, because he's an ambassador to the tourist board. And he was in Rio for Carnival. And they said, look, don't tell the press guys yet, because we'll just have to check his schedule. But so I had to set up this press conference, not telling the press that it was going to be Pele, but saying, look, guys, you just got to trust me on this one. It's going to be worth your while being there. And of course, praying that if he didn't turn up, I wasn't sure what I was going to explain to them, give them a rundown of the history of Carnival or something. But Pele graciously turned up. He couldn't have been more charming and nice to chat to. And I remember he walked into that room, and there's, unusually for journalists, it was total silence as they just were looking and thinking, is it him? Is it a looky-likey or something? I mean, is this the real guy? And they, he just sat down and chatted to them. And I could realize as a journalist myself that every single journalist in that room suddenly realized they had a story when they told their editors, no, I've just been in an interview with Pele. They were going to get coverage. And he chatted to everybody. He took all their questions. Afterwards, he posed with everybody. He couldn't have been nicer to the press and things at that time, and busy time for him, and it showed what a gracious man he was. And he was a great ambassador for Brazil around the world.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that as well, because obviously the people who have met him in their tributes have all talked about his kind of kind, gracious character and how lovely a person he really was. So did you really get a sense of that in the times that you did meet him?
Yeah. I mean, he wasn't hung up by who he was, which is a picture some people try to paint of him, because he would so often call himself Pele. Pele does this, Pele does that. But it's very difficult when you're that famous and you're known by one name. And he'd often say to people, actually call me Edson, which was his real name. So it was, but he was always interested by other things going on and the impact of other matters around the world. He kindly turned up at the Cannes Film Festival several times to either support Brazil there, or there would be films about him and things. And again, you put Pele on the red carpet at Cannes, and my God, he goes beyond Tom Cruise or these people. It's again like the only other person you could say that was of his level was Ali. That if you took, Muhammad Ali, and I was lucky enough to be at the Academy Awards when Muhammad Ali was there with Foreman because of their documentary together. And again, it's that presence when they walk in the room, you go, oh my God, it's Ali, it's Pele. Nobody on the planet doesn't know them. And actually, looking back, I remember, even before the 1970 World Cup, when the Queen visited Brazil with Prince Philip, this would have been 1968, a special game was put on in Rio's Maracanã Stadium with Pele leading one of the teams, which luckily won, so the Queen could present the trophy to Pele, and he was already iconic then, and that was before the 1970 World Cup.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, talk about him being iconic. This is a final question: is do you think there's ever going to be for Brazil an icon like Pele?
I think it's unlikely. I mean, the US hasn't found a replacement for Ali. And I think the difficult thing when you reach that level is that both Ali and Pele were people of the entire planet. Although they were American and Brazilian, they were also seen as just part of a global community that they were embraced by. For Brazil, I mean, one of the things Brazil's reflecting on, that he really did take the name of Brazil and Brazil as a country to the world when it was very unknown. It was him and the 70 team that really made the Brazilian shirt one of the most famous and loved in the world. And I'm very thankful that at the end, Pele was very clever of trying to avoid politics. And when they won in 1970, Brazil had quite a brutal military dictatorship, which he tried to take the team away from. So that it was separate joy for the people. And I think he was with the current outgoing Brazilian president, he was quite annoyed of this guy trying to hijack the Brazilian shirt for his political party. And there was this feeling now with the World Cup and everything now with Pele that the country can reclaim that golden shirt again. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people wearing it on the day of his funeral, which is going to be either the 2nd or 3rd. Normally in Brazil, everybody's buried within 24 hours. But they're deliberately, with the new president coming in on January the 1st, they're going to wait until the 2nd and 3rd to have his coffin will be in one of the football stadiums in São Paulo, and then they will have the full funeral.
Brilliant. Yes. Well, thank you so much for chatting to us about Pele. I mean, what a legacy.
It will be. He won't be forgotten, I don't think. I think we'll see a lot of being talked about him for years and years and years to come. And thank God we got some video footage to still watch his brilliance.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you.
A pleasure.